My mom is cruel to my cat. About a month ago, one of my close friends passed away in a car accident. I was devastated and fell into a pretty dark depression. My dad was super understanding and suggested that I get a pet to help me cope with the loss. My mom has always been kind of a hard ass. She doesn't like to show emotion and hates when other people do. She told me to get over it and life happens. She also hates animals in the house. I started going to therapy, and once my therapist suggested getting an animal, my dad finally just did it against my mom's wishes. He brought me home a little white kitten that I named Vlad. My mom hated him. From the minute he entered the house, she complained that he smelled bad, that he ate too much, that his litter box made her nauseous. But he was really good for me, and my dad was adamant about me keeping him. Last week, Vlad threw up on the carpet after eating wet food too fast. When I got home, my mom was holding him under the water in the sink with a washcloth over his face, literally waterboarding my cat for his upset tummy. I ran over and snatched him out of her hands, and he was terrified, weak, and spitting up water. I was furious. I called her a terrible person and took Vlad to the vet to make sure he was okay. My dad met me at the vet and stayed with me until we could take him home. My dad was furious with my mom too. I heard them fighting that night as I held Vlad in my arms. I heard my mom's screams, and then the bathtub running, and then her muffled screams, and then her gurgling, gasping, choking, and then the faucet turned off and I heard nothing. I think Vlad is safe now, thanks to my amazing dad. I want to read my daughter's diary to find out why she left us. My wife says absolutely not. When my wife shuffled into the room, still half asleep, I was staring at a little red diary on the dining table. Anne's eyes shot open wider than dinner plates. Tell me you didn't read that. With my eyes fixed on the book, I took a long sip of coffee and shook my head. I'm trying to decide what Kira would want. A hand shot up against Anne's chest as she took several slow, steady breaths. You can't. How do you think she'd feel knowing her father snooped through her diary? Under normal circumstances, I'd agree with you. Great. I caught her wrist to keep her from grabbing it away. But these aren't normal circumstances. For 20 minutes, Anne insisted my reading it would be a monstrous betrayal. Already in tears, I protested, said I needed to know the reason my daughter checked out. She always seemed so bubbly, so joyful. She and I talked about everything, yet she never once hinted she was suffering. The only problem she faced was constantly clashing heads with her stepmother. I told Anne she didn't understand the pain I was in, the torture of not understanding why. The two of us reached an agreement, give it 1 week. Once I read the diary, there'd be no one reading it, so it was better to take 7 days and give the decision some serious thought. The anxiety drove me to the brink. My coffee intake increased to 18 cups a day. I started smoking again and needed a glass of whiskey, or 2, or 3, or 4, just to sleep at night. On the morning of the 7th day, Anne was waiting for me in the kitchen. She asked how I was feeling, and I told her I decided to read the damn thing. Sighing, she poured me a coffee and said, "If you're sure, honey." I left it in the top drawer of Kira's makeup counter. I shuffled upstairs, sat before the mirror, fished my daughter's diary out, took a deep breath, and then opened it at the final entry. But strangely, that page was dated the previous day. It ended with, "I can't take living in a world without Kira, so I've decided to join her. All my affairs are in order. Tomorrow, I'm mixing poison in with my coffee. Goodbye everyone. I'll see you soon, my darling." When I tried to stand, the room and all the furniture lurched from side to side. The carpeted floor drifted closer as my hands flew up around my throat, which had become drier than sandpaper. It felt like I'd inhaled a cloud of sulfuric acid. A pair of fuzzy slippers lay directly beside my skull. My eyeballs rotated up toward Anne, who was looming over me. And as a sly grin spread across her face, the real reason why Kira left us finally dawned on me. I swapped dinner plates with my unaware mother-in-law last week. Her funeral is tomorrow. I've known my husband since high school. We were friends for the longest time before we started to date, which eventually led to our marriage. My mother-in-law has always been a precise person. Things needed to be perfect for her to be happy. If something looked off to her in the slightest, she had to fix it immediately. The only time she ever relaxed was when she was drunk, which happened seldom. That was her first mistake. Last Thursday, my mother-in-law sent out a message in the family group chat on my husband's side. She was hosting a gathering that started at 6 p.m. sharp. Her message was formal and typed out carefully, the opposite of how I write. That wasn't the only way of living we didn't share. I'm a very laid-back person. I do things because I want to do them, not because other people think I should do them. I don't let others influence my lifestyle. My mother-in-law sure has tried to, though. She seems to think that since she's made everyone else in the family perfect, she can do the same with me, too. No one in our family is actually perfect, though. They only pretend to be in order to appease the beast. I won't be pressured into being somebody I'm not, no matter how much I'm nagged about it. But the nagging had stopped recently. The one time I went over to her house before the party, my mother-in-law didn't make a snarky comment about me once. We even had a conversation over tea. Maybe this could be a turning point in our relationship, I thought. It wasn't. I never would have noticed something was off. My mother-in-law greeted the family in her stiff, curt manner. The house was spotless when we stepped inside, as per usual. As soon as they settled, the guests began to drink. Nothing too heavy though. Mother-in-law would be upset if anyone misbehaved when it came time to eat. To most of our surprise, she poured herself a glass of wine when she sat down with us. My husband, who sat on the sofa beside me, whispered that he'd only seen his mother drinking 4 times in his entire life. It was odd, but I didn't look too deep into it. She probably was just nervous about the party, with the constant tap of her foot to the floor. When dinner time came around, my mother-in-law was full on drunk. She slurred her words as she announced the meal she had prepared. turkey, sausage, roasted peppers, mashed potatoes, and homemade gravy. It looked delicious. I scooped up portions of each onto my plate and made a quick escape from the kitchen to wash my hands. I didn't even notice the vial my mother-in-law was holding as I passed her. When I came back and we all sat down at the dinner table, my plate was right where I left it. Except I noticed something different. I never, ever put gravy on my potatoes, so who did? Whatever, I'll just get a new portion and give the other to someone else. I headed back into the kitchen and was surprised to see that all of the potatoes had been taken. Come to think of it, my mother-in-law hadn't baked a huge amount of mashed potatoes in the first place. I'll just switch with whoever in the family liked gravy and had a similar plate of food to mine. Everyone had already started eating when I got back, however. The only person who wasn't at the table was, you guessed it, my husband's mother. She was occupied trying to calm down one of her wailing grandchildren and failing miserably. With so much on her hands, as well as the alcohol in her system, she didn't notice I took her plate of food and replaced it with mine. Dinner was great. I had no idea I'd just narrowly escaped death. My mother-in-law was quiet the entire time we said goodbyes, half-assing every hug that she was given. My husband is the type of person to take years to say his goodbyes, so I sat back down on the couch and waited for him to finish. I only really gave goodbyes to the people I knew well, my husband's 2 cousins and aunt. I'd known them since they surprised my husband with a visit whilst I was hanging out with him all those years ago. I almost jumped out of my skin when I felt a hand touch my bare shoulder. It was my mother-in-law, looking panicked. She asked me if I'd had gravy on my mashed potatoes and I responded truthfully. Her eyes went wide and she looked like she was about to cry. I didn't have the chance to interrogate her because my husband was calling for me. We finally left the house and were headed back to our own place. Though I do love a good get-together, that night was exhausting. I couldn't shake the feeling something was terribly wrong, though. I ignored it for the next couple of days, focusing only on work and keeping the house clean. Until one day I came home to my husband sitting on the couch in tears. His mother had passed away from some sort of unknown poisoning. And that's how I got here, typing out my little story the night before my mother-in-law's funeral while my husband sleeps peacefully next to me. He hadn't gotten a proper rest since she passed. Mourning and planning the funeral did a number on him. I trust my husband and I know he trusts me too, but if I told him what I thought was planned to happen that night he wouldn't believe me. He'd probably hate me for even thinking his mother would try to hurt me. She's never done it before, so why now? I've been trying to tell myself this but I just can't believe it. If she was innocent, why did she drink an abnormal amount of alcohol? Why did she slather gravy on my potatoes when she knew I wouldn't eat it? And why would she ask me about it right before we left? This has to be a mistake, it has too. It must all just be a coincidence. But I can't let it go. I'm such a terrible person for thinking my mother-in-law tried to poison me. Or is she the terrible person? I don't even know anymore. A girl disappeared in Japan, 1967. Recently, I found her diary and it tells a horrifying story. I work at a public bathhouse in a small town in Japan, doing housekeeping and cashier shifts mostly. It's a quiet place, with most of our visitors being retired, and aside from a few accidents a year, nothing serious. Mind you, things run pretty smoothly. It's a stress-free job, which fits me well since I don't like to find myself outside of my comfort zone very often. About a week ago, though, something out of the ordinary happened. When cleaning the dressing rooms, I found a diary underneath a bench. It had belonged to a teenage girl, which was odd enough since most of the kids used the bathhouse adjoined to the school, but it wasn't until I opened it that I truly realized what a strange finding it was. Below, I've transcribed and translated the part of the journal that stands out from what can be considered normal and which points to a fate maybe even worse than death. January 24, 1967. I woke up early this morning, feeling a bit restless. I got out of bed and went to the kitchen, where I found my mom. We started arguing almost immediately. She doesn't understand me, and I can't stand living under her roof. We were both shouting by the end of it. I stormed out of the house and went to find Kimura. I told her about my fight with my mom and she suggested that we go to the public bath tomorrow. I immediately agreed. It sounds like exactly what I need. I'm also going to invite some of our other friends to make it even more fun. January 25, 1967. I was getting dressed in the locker room after spending the day in the public bath with my friends. Suddenly, it became eerily silent and I realized I was all alone. Upon leaving the locker room, I noticed the environment was different. The blue tiles of the bathhouse were now red, with black between them. I saw no one around, and the only sound was the soft lap of water against the tiles. This was definitely not the same bathhouse I had entered just hours ago. I don't know how long I stood there, trying to understand what had happened. Had I somehow been transported to another building? Or was this some kind of dream? I pinched myself to see if that would wake me up, but it had no effect. I was really starting to freak out now. I decided to explore a bit and see if I could find any clues as to what was going on. This place was much larger than the bathhouse I remembered, and there seemed to be endless rows of pools. I called out for help, but my voice echoed back to me unanswered. I don't know how long I've been here exactly or what's going on, but I'm starting to think I may never find my way back home. The only light comes from large, dim lamps in the ceiling. There are no windows. Some corridors extend into complete darkness. I haven't dared venture too far into them. There's something dreadful about them. I'm starting to lose hope. Maybe I'm just going crazy. Maybe I died in the bathhouse and this is some kind of afterlife. Or maybe I'm just dreaming. I don't know anymore. All I know is that I'm alone in this strange place and I have no idea what to do. I'm hoarse from yelling and my throat aches from the effort. I'm so tired. I think I'll just rest here for a while. Maybe something will come to me in a dream. January 26, 1967. I'm still here. I haven't found any way out. I'm starting to despair. I've been exploring more of the place. It's huge. There must be thousands of pools. There's not a living soul to be seen. Just me, all alone. I'm starting to feel like I'm going mad. Yesterday I could have sworn I saw someone in one of the baths, but when I got closer there was no one there. I'm so tired. I can't keep going like this. I need to find a way out. January 27, 1967. The water in the pools is still and stagnant. It's dark in here and there. The surface shimmers as if covered in a thin layer of oil. It's like something from a nightmare. I can't bring myself to even touch it, let alone drink it. I've been walking for hours, and I still can't find a way out. This place is like a labyrinth. I'm so thirsty, but I daren't drink the water. I don't know what's in it. I'm starting to feel weak. I need food and water, or I'm going to die here. I don't know how much longer I can last. January 28, 1967. I found a tap today. It was in one of the many empty locker rooms I've stumbled upon, and it looked like it had running water. I was so thirsty, I didn't care if it was safe or not. I drank and drank until my stomach ached. The water was rusty and had an odd taste to it, but I didn't care. I needed water, and this was the only thing I'd found. I rested for a while after I'd drunk my fill, and then I started exploring again. I still can't find a way out, but at least I'm not thirsty anymore. January 30th, 1967. I was starting to feel really weak, and I knew I needed to find food soon or I wouldn't make it. I had just about given up hope when I stumbled upon a larger room with arches and stairs, all covered in the same red and black as everything else. It reminded me of a cathedral, but it was much more sinister. There was something about it that made my skin crawl. I was about to turn and leave when I saw something that made my heart stop. Lying on the ground, half hidden in the shadows, was a body. I approached cautiously, not knowing what to expect. It was a man, and he was dead. There was no sign of violence, but his eyes were wide open and staring, and his face was contorted in a look of terror. I don't know what happened to him, but I know I don't want to stick around to find out. I need to get out of here. January 31st, 1967. I'm starting to feel really ill. I think the water I drank was poisoned. I've been vomiting and have a terrible headache. I need to find help soon, or I'm going to die. I managed to drag myself to my feet and stumble around for a while longer, but I didn't find anything. I'm so thirsty, but I daren't drink any more of the water. I don't know what's in it. I'm starting to see things now. I see people in the baths, but when I get closer they disappear. I hear voices, but when I try to follow them they fade away. I'm losing my mind. February 1st, 1967. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I'm so thirsty, and I'm still seeing things that aren't there. Movements in the corner of my eyes. I'm hallucinating now. Or am I? I'm so tired. I think I'm going to lie down and rest for a while. Maybe things will make more sense when I wake up. February 11th, 1967. I was stumbling around in the weak light, barely able to keep myself upright. I'd been walking for hours, and I was starting to think I was going in circles. I was so thirsty, and my head was spinning. I saw a pool ahead of me, and I staggered towards it. It was darker than the others, and it looked like it descended into the depths of the earth. I lay down on the edge of the pool and leaned over. I tried to see the bottom, but it was too deep. I lay there for a while, too weak to move. I must have drifted off to sleep because the next thing I knew, I was awake and something was moving in the water. I saw a large, dark shape circling in the depths. It filled me with terror. As it moved closer and closer to the surface, I ran across the room to get away. I don't know what that thing was, but I never want to see it again. February 14th, 1967. The red color of the tiles is making me feel dizzy and nauseous. It reminds me of blood. I can't take it anymore. I need to get out of here. Wherever I go, there are just more pools and corridors. They all look the same, and they're all filled with that stagnant, undrinkable water. February 16th, 1967. I'm so thirsty. I'm going to drink the water, no matter how dangerous it is. I filled my cupped hands with water from one of the pools and drank. It was disgusting, but I was so thirsty I didn't care. Almost immediately, I felt sick. My stomach cramped for hours. I lay on the ground, too weak to move. I think this is it. I'm going to die here. February 18th, 1967. I've been thinking about the dead body I saw earlier. I keep wondering who he was and how he died. Was he poisoned by the water, like me? Or did something else kill him? I'm so tired. I can't keep my eyes open anymore. I'm going to rest for a while. February 20th, 1967. I can't believe it's been almost a month since I first arrived in this place. It feels like a lifetime. I'm so weak I can barely move. I'm sure I'm going to die soon. I don't know why I'm still holding on. Maybe it's because I refuse to believe this is the end. I keep hoping that someone will find me, but I know that's unlikely. February 25th, 1967. It was my birthday today. I'm now 17. I should be out with my friends, celebrating. Instead, I'm alone in this nightmare. I miss Mom too. I know she would have baked me a cake and sung happy birthday. Maybe this is hell, and this is my punishment for all the times I was a bratty teenager. If so, I deserve it. I should have been nicer to her. March 3rd, 1967. I'm getting weaker and weaker. I can barely move anymore. I've been lying in the same spot for days. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. March 5th, 1967. I was lying underneath the pale lights, too weak to move. I thought I was going to die there and then. Then I heard something moving in the distance, getting closer and closer. It sounded like something big and heavy, dragging itself across the floor. I was filled with terror, and I forced myself to my feet. I stumbled across the room, and then I was running as fast as I could. I don't know what it was, but I know I don't want to meet it. March 10th, 1967. I've been walking for hours, as usual, and I still can't find a way out. Everything looks familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. I've gone upstairs and downstairs, across pedways, and through corridors. Everything looks the same. It's all just a blur of red and black. I'm trying to build up the courage to dive into one of the deep pools, the ones with no bottom in sight. Perhaps that's the way out. But what if there's another creature like the one from before? March 12, 1967. I can't stop thinking about the thing that was hunting me. I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, looking for me. How am I still alive? I haven't eaten for more than a month. It isn't natural. It's like this place is playing with me, toying with me. I'm getting weaker and weaker, and it's only a matter of time before that thing catches up to me. The sound of the water, the lapping against the tiles, and the dripping from the ceiling, it all sounds like footsteps, like something is coming for me. March 17, 1967. I found a newspaper on the ground yesterday. It was partly burned. I didn't recognize the language, but I could see when it was printed. September 5, 2005. The images were strangely colorful, more vivid than anything I've ever seen before on a piece of paper. They showed people in clothes I'd never seen, smiling and happy. I stared at the paper for a long time, trying to understand what I was looking at. It must be from the future. But how did it get here? And how did I get here? March 20th, 1967. I'm so thirsty. I've been walking for days. I know I won't make it much further. I've been thinking about the thing I heard. I keep wondering if it's still out there, looking for me. March 21st, 1967. I'm not sure what's real anymore. I keep seeing things that aren't there. Yesterday I saw my mom. She was standing in front of me, smiling. But when I tried to reach out to her, she faded away. I know I'm going crazy. March 23rd, 1967. I saw my mom again today. She was standing in front of me, smiling and holding out her arms. I tried to reach out to her, but she disappeared into thin air. I miss her so much. I wish I could just go home. March 25th, 1967. I heard that dreadful thing coming for me again, just a few rooms behind me. This time, it screeched too. I'm so tired. I can't keep running. I'm going to jump into one of the deep pools and dive into the darkness. Maybe this is the way out. Maybe this is what I've been looking for all along. I'm leaving the diary here. It would be ruined by the water anyway. I hope someone finds it and can make sense of what happened to me. I'm so scared, but I'm also so tired. I just want this to be over. I don't know what's down there, but it can't be worse than what's chasing me. I'm sorry, Mom. I wish I could have said goodbye. What makes this so unsettling is that at the beginning of 1967, a young girl went missing in our otherwise peaceful town. And the last place anyone ever saw her was here, at the establishment where I work. I hope she got out, somehow, maybe in the distant past or future, and that it wasn't just everlasting darkness that awaited her down that pool. Rules to follow as a 911 dispatcher. Hey, you ready for your first day as a 911 dispatcher? Of course you are. 911 dispatcher can be a very hard and stressful job, but it can also be a very fun job where you'll learn a few new things. For example, how to stay calm in stressful situations. You will be working with a work-in-progress program called redditStories. This program will redirect some calls to you. We have some procedures we would like you to follow though. Working as a 911 dispatcher, day shift. 1. When receiving a call, please pick up the phone immediately. 2. If you leave your desk, please select the unavailable option in the redditStories program. Otherwise, calls might be redirected towards you while you're not at your desk. 3. You might receive some calls that are very distressing or disturbing. You can always talk with your supervisor if you have something on your mind. 4. Only go to your supervisor when you have something urgent. She doesn't like unnecessary questions. 5. You might receive a call from a woman called Susie. She will sound very distressed and will ask you to send help. Don't ask for an address. Politely respond by saying, "Okay, Susie, help is on the way." The emergency services will know what to do. 6. If you receive a call from the number +39 6698, do not pick up. Simply let it ring. If you do pick up, you might experience some intense ringing in your ears, which will only get worse and louder over time until you can't hear anything anymore. 7. A random number might call you. If you can hear faint crying in the background, hang up immediately. Not hanging up will result in a permanent catatonic state. 8. Be sure to feed the fish every 4 hours. We have a big pond outside with multiple fish in them. Please do not forget to feed them. 9. Don't put your hand in the pond, otherwise you'll lose it. 10. A man named Mr. Meckwell has been calling 911 lately. He has a very unusual number, which is 91,212 1,191,212 251,521. If you receive a call from this number, pick up the phone. Do not let it ring. Ask what his name is and he will calmly respond by saying, "My name is Francis Meckwell, sir, madam." After that, hang up immediately. Hanging up the phone earlier will result in Mr. Meckwell finding you, and you do not want that to happen. We have no idea how to stop Mr. Meckwell from calling us. We asked the phone company about this and they said that they had no records of the phone number ever existing. 11. When picking up a call, you might hear someone breathing and groaning behind you. Act like everything is normal and try not to react to whatever is behind you. Everyone who did is currently missing. 12. The power might go out around 4 p.m. Please remain calm and don't take your eyes off your screen. And please, try not to acknowledge the screams. I had a disturbing conversation with my 7-year-old daughter. Dad, I saw a zombie. I was in the kitchen making tea when my little girl came rushing in. She ran through the back door so fast she almost tripped up the step. I poured boiling water from the kettle into a mug, hardly looking up. Oh yeah, I did. Its face was all pale and messed up. It was gross, Dad. I put the kettle back and picked up the milk, sighed inwardly. I really had to be more careful about what I watched on TV in the evening. Rosie has a habit of sneaking downstairs in the night, and last week she caught me watching The Walking Dead, of all things. She's had zombies on the brain ever since. I keep telling her they're not real, but it doesn't seem to make a difference. Sweetheart, what did we say about zombies? I scooped the tea bag out of the mug and dumped it in the bin. You know if you keep talking about them, Daddy's going to get in trouble with Mummy again. Yeah, but I saw one. I know, darling, but I already checked the back garden twice yesterday, and I can promise you it's a zombie-free zone. No, not in the back garden. I didn't see it in the back garden. I had the mug half raised to my lips, but now I put it down again. I turned to look at Rosie. Her hair was windswept and her little cheeks were red, as if she'd been running. Sweetheart, I put on my best stern, Dad's not happy voice. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest with me. Have you been playing along the path out back again? I didn't really need to ask the question, because I already knew the answer. Rosie is allowed to play in the garden on her own, and sometimes, if she asks us permission first, we let her ride her bike along the path at the back of our house, the one that runs past all the neighbors' back gardens. But that's all we allow her to do. This area is pretty safe, but these days you can never be too careful. There was a burglary a couple of roads over a few months back, and last year someone was mugged on the high street. Several years ago, a few towns over, a little boy even went missing. That was quite a long way away from here, of course, but it made national news for a few days until the search fizzled out. And it made a lot of parents more cautious. Rosie's getting older now, and she's an adventurous girl, but still, you have to have boundaries. And on a few occasions lately, Rosie's been crossing those boundaries, riding her bike further than she should, not coming in straight away when we call her, sneaking out the back gate when she's only meant to be playing in the garden. As I watched Rosie now, I noticed her face growing redder. She looked away from me, down at the kitchen floor, and scuffed her feet. Dad, I only went a little way down, she said. I promise. I was chatting to Mr. Henderson, because I saw him in his back garden. I said hello and made him jump. I sighed. So there it was, Mr. Henderson was Rosie's zombie. Yesterday it was the postman, and the day before that it was a different neighbor. I took a sip of tea and shook my head. Mr. Henderson was, in fairness, a better candidate than the others. The guy lives on his own, and he looks about 100 years old. Moles all over his face, skin like a deflated balloon. Whenever we chatted over the garden fence before, though, he'd always seemed nice enough. Just a bit lonely. I couldn't have Rosie going around calling him a zombie. Listen to me, sweetheart. I know you didn't go far or anything, but I don't want you. I came right back after too, Dad. Rosie interrupted. She was staring up at me now, blue eyes large and pleading. I promise. And I even said no when Mr. Henderson offered me an ice cream, because I know you don't like me taking stuff from strangers. I opened my mouth to respond, then paused. He offered you ice cream? Yeah, but I said no. Mr. Henderson really wanted me to come in and have one, but I told him I had to get home. And then I came straight back here to tell you I'd seen a zombie, and Rosie was babbling now, her voice whirring like a motor, but I'd stopped listening. My mind was still stuck on something she'd said a moment before. Mr. Henderson really wanted me to come in and have one. I took another sip of tea and frowned. That wasn't good. I didn't mind the neighbors chatting to my little girl, but I didn't like the thought of them inviting her in, not without us there, not even if they were just kind, lonely old men. I made up my mind to go round and visit Mr. Henderson later, and to tell him that myself, kindly, of course, but firmly. In the end, though, I didn't get a chance, because a few moments after I'd had the thought, Rosie said something else. Something that pushed everything else from my mind, and ended any idea I might have had about going over to Mr. Henderson's house. She said something that made me feel cold. Daddy, please don't stop me playing in the garden. I promise I won't sneak out again. I don't want the zombie to get me. Rosie, I'm not going to stop you playing in the garden. But you have to make me a couple of promises, too. First, promise me you'll stop going around calling people zombies. Mr. Henderson might be old, but he's not one of the living dead. Rosie frowned. I didn't. What do you mean, you didn't? You just ran in here a moment ago calling him one. No, I didn't. Mr. Henderson's not a zombie. I saw the zombie in his house, but it wasn't him. I frowned. I had the mug raised to my lips to take another sip of tea, but now I put it down again. What do you mean, sweetheart? You saw someone else in his house. Yeah, the zombie, Dad. I could see it pressed against his little basement window while I was talking to him. Cold fingers ran up my spine. What? Yeah, it was really scary. Its face was all bashed up and bloody, and its mouth was open, like it was screaming at me. But do you know what confused me most, Dad? I tried to keep my voice steady. What? Well, I didn't realize kids could be zombies, too. I thought it was only grown-ups. But I guess I must have been wrong, because the one in Mr. Henderson's basement looked just like a little boy. Suicide is never the answer, trust me. Suicide is a selfish choice, and never the answer, no matter how bad it gets. Life can be cruel at times, whether due to a lost job, the death of a loved one, a bad breakup, or depression that gets so bad you ache for the quiet nothingness of death. But suicide is never the answer. Most problems can be fixed with the help of friends and family, a therapist, medication, or just time. In time things will get better, easier. Suicide, you can't take that back. Suicide is a selfish choice. You may think you're ending the pain, the suffering, but all you're really doing is passing that on to someone else. You leave a gaping hole in those you left behind. The questions, the guilt of not seeing the signs, of not doing more. Suicide is selfish. I should have seen the signs when Amy stopped wanting to go out to do the things we used to love to do together. Hiking, and sitting on the beach in the winter, bundled up in the same overly large sweater. I should have noticed the quiet meals. Her late nights at work that became more frequent. I should have noticed how she leaned away from my embrace instead of leaning into it. I should have noticed that she rarely smiled anymore. I noticed these things, sure, but I didn't realize the importance. I just summed it up to stress at work, those long hours taking a heavy toll on her. I was blinded by my love for her, my need for her to be fine. The day I found out about Amy, my world ended. Now all I'm left with is constant heartache, constant questions that will never be answered, constant overwhelming sadness. So please take this piece of advice. Suicide is selfish. I wish now that I let time heal my wounds. In time I would have gotten over Amy leaving me for her boss. I would have learned to forgive and move on, instead of being left in a pit of despair so deep that it's suffocating. Suicide is never the answer to your problems. Trust me, I just wish I would have known that before I jumped. What not to do after a breakup. Do not leave your ex's photos, gifts, or love letters lying around. Do not retroactively idolize the relationship. Do not try to rush the grieving process. Do not ice out friends and family who are only trying to help. Do not wallow around in self-pity. Do not stalk your ex on social media. Do not obsess over your ex's new partner. Do not try reaching out to your ex. Do not take it personally when your ex doesn't respond. Do not overindulge in drugs and alcohol and become so enraged by the fact your ex effortlessly moved on you drive over to their house at 3 a.m. Do not get into a shouting match with your ex and her new ex-Hollister model boyfriend who has a prestigious law career. Otherwise, the elderly neighbors will tell the police they heard shouting from the apartment next door whenever they're asked about the missing persons cases 3 days later. Do not try burning the corpse of your ex's new boyfriend. It won't work, trust me. Do not speak to the friendly detective who claims to be on your side, as they're very sneaky and will trick you. Luckily, without a murder weapon or a body, they're completely powerless. Do not keep any evidence of what transpired at your house. The police will obtain a search warrant. Find a secure location and always check you aren't followed there. Do not rush to rebuild the relationship with your ex. These things take time. If you see this, don't stop reading. Once you see this video, it's too late. It knows exactly where you are. Good news is, there's only one of them. There will never be more. Bad news is, you have to follow these rules perfectly. Good luck, and stay safe. 1. Don't stop reading this. Even if you have finished the video, pretend to keep watching. This is especially crucial once you feel that sense of dread. It lasts until daylight. 2. Never click off this video. Make sure you stay here as long as you can. You can play music, but do not get off this page for more than 10 seconds. It can tell if you are still on this page. 3. Make sure your back is against the wall. It likes to tease you to force your eyes away from the screen. You may feel some claws on the back of your neck or on your back. If you put your back against the wall, it won't do too much. 4. It is cunning. You may survive the day, but it will always return. It may take days, or even weeks, before your second encounter with it. Never let your guard down. 5. If you have a sibling, kill them. Use whatever method you'd like. There is no way to tell if it is impersonating them or if it is your real sibling. 6. If you feel a shadowy presence in the corner of your room, ignore it. That is the most common trap it uses to pull your eyes away from the screen. 7. After a while of staring at the screen, the sky outside your window might turn orange or yellow. Do not look outside unless you are sure that it's already daytime. 8. It leaves at 6 a.m. 9. Look up. 10. It's above you, reader, look up. I watched the live face reveal of my favorite YouTuber. What I saw will always haunt me. I come from a small mining town in Arizona where there is not a lot to do except hike. It was a good but boring area to grow up. Our population was small with little to no crime. My father owned the quarry where a majority of the community's economic strength came from. He left me a sizable inheritance after he passed away. I bought a truck and a house out in the plains with a basketball court and a pool. That was the sole extent of my lavish spending, but it was all I needed. Unless you count pizza, I didn't have many vices to blow my fortune on. I've never been an avid party goer, luckily. Like a lot of people my age, one indulgence I did have was watching YouTube. Urban exploration became a most searched category of mine from 2009 on. I became a subscriber of a content creator and urbex vlogger named Isolation Infinity. He kept himself anonymous and did not show his face. He used footage of the haunts he went into as captured by the body camera strapped to his chest. His voice's baritone became a signature element of the channel. He traveled all over the world and went into many chilling places. These included vacant hospitals, asylums, morgues, and train stations. He even stumbled upon a murder in progress once. A homeless man had stomped another transient to death in a farmhouse. He uploaded edited parts of it. This was a controversial decision. It almost resulted in a lifetime ban for him from the platform. The clips did help law enforcement later on, nonetheless. He was also arrested a few times for trespassing on famous estates. The Houdini mansion in Los Angeles was one of them, but none of his fans held this against him. We respected him for being willing to get into trouble with the law in pursuit of the next viral video. Late last year, Isolation Infinity announced he was going to have a live face reveal. It was only going to be for his patrons, i.e. those who gave money to his Patreon account. I contributed funds to it on a monthly basis. I viewed him as a pioneer of his entertainment niche and did not mind sparing a little change. He emailed me and told me I was one of a dozen allowed to attend the live event. He further stated it would be in a password-protected chat room. He also promised an exclusive video which would not make it onto the public video lineup. I was more interested in the latter than the former. I never cared what his appearance was since I already had a vision of someone my age, in their mid to late 20s. It was hard to convince me he looked any different from the picture in my mind's eye. Still, I was not going to turn down the chance to find out. Being able to brag to his diehard followers who did not get to experience it would be worth it alone. The night of the scheduled face reveal, I booted up my PC. I kicked back on a lounge chair in the second-story room of my house, which was my entertainment space. It was complete with video game consoles and my beloved Alienware computer. An open bag of peppered jerky and a bottle of ginger ale sat next to my keyboard. I went into my email. The password was in my inbox. I followed the link. It led me to the video of a room with nothing in it but a red wall with a baby blue frame. The caption "Isolation Infinity" will be on shortly rested at the bottom of the screen. I expected a home studio and instead got what appeared to be someone's dingy basement in need of a new coat of paint. What bothered me the most was the sound of heavy machinery whirring in the background. I wrote it off as bad plumbing. A man came into the frame. He was slim and wore a trench coat with maroon buttons on its front. He reached down, grabbed the lens of the camera, and shifted it upward. The familiar voice we had all grown fond of started to count down. "Are you ready to see who I am?" Isolation Infinity asked. 1, 2, 3, 4. At 5, he hoisted it upwards and pointed it at his face. I froze. He looked nothing like what I had visualized. He was hairless, emaciated, pale, and had marble black eyes. He reminded me of Werner Cross from the old German 1920 film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. His mouth hung open and tilted to the side as if he could not control the movement of his jaw. The most alarming thing to me was not how his features were not flattering. That explained why he valued being off camera for most of his career. What upset me the most in the beginning was how the disparity in his perceived age made me feel lied to. He always told his fans he was a young man, like most of his demographic. The individual before me on the screen was in his 50s at the earliest. "I have been fantasizing about broadcasting this for a long time," he said as he licked his lips. "You have made this possible, and so I need to show my appreciation by giving thanks in the most sincere way I know how." He moved the camera to the left and I could not believe what I saw. A woman in her 30s sat on a grimy floor, her head down from evident exhaustion. Rusted chains circled her arms. She wore a tattered black top, as though someone's knife or nails had left wounds on portions of her torso. Stains were on her clothes. She had spent time in the dirt fighting someone or clawing her way out of a soiled embankment before this. "Say something," he ordered her. "Tell them you can't wait, die." The blades of a chainsaw came into view and its motor revved. She whimpered with pain, and when she tried to murmur something I saw blood drip from her mouth. I dragged the mouse cursor over to the right-hand side of the screen to see how many people were in the chat. The answer I received left me weak. No one else was there but me. The others had either left or were never there to begin with, and I was too stupid to notice until then. My heartbeat increased as I tried to close the window out. I could not. The X symbol on the right-hand side was visible but useless. It was like every virus-infected pop-up ad you could not escape from. "What?" Infinity Isolation asked. "You don't like it, Mark? Everything I do is to make my most devoted subscribers happy." A chill ran through me. He knew my name. It took me a second to realize he had gotten it through my membership to his Patreon. The fact that he was aware of how I was his only viewer worried me. Was I going to be the sole witness to a barbaric act of murder? "Calm down," I reassured myself. "This is an elaborate prank he's recording right now. He's wearing scary Hollywood makeup and she's an actress. This is all for the sake of getting more views. The chainsaw has to be a prop bought off Etsy.com. Still, my hand inched towards the phone to call 911. The way the woman expressed her misery in the moment was all too convincing. I held my device closer to my ear. "I wouldn't do that if I was you, Mark." He stared right at the screen for a moment, his eyes making perfect contact with mine. "Can you see me?" He lifted the chainsaw above the woman's head. He brought it down with a noise from his throat which sounded like a cross between a scream and a laugh. A fountain of gore spurted out. The lens got hit with crimson bubbles. He cackled as I unplugged my computer. I carried it downstairs to my car and drove to the nearest police station. I filled out an incident report in an office with a dying lamp and the scowl of a detective facing me. He looked as though he would have rather been anywhere else but at work. For the first 2 hours there, I had to convince them that I was not a crazy person. They thought I was there to waste their time with a fanciful tale of my correspondence with some creep. "I hope it was all a hoax," I said. "If this is not real, no one would be happier about it than me. Here's my computer. See if you can't trace where he's at in case ... I gagged before I could complete my thought. The idea of it being authentic was overwhelming. They had cybercrimes go over everything, and a few days later I got my PC back. It took about a week before I received a call from someone working the case. She was a homicide investigator named Samantha Brown. "We found the killer was streaming from a bunker in Virginia," she said. "It's an old fallout shelter abandoned since the Cold War. He calls himself the I-73 Butcher since the highway is his preferred route. He uses it as a screen name on the dark web. Infinity Isolation is a serial killer," I asked, feeling a knot in my stomach. "No," she said. "The real Isolation Infinity is someone else. This maniac poses as famous people. He uses a combination of tools, including voice-altering software and encrypted Wi-Fi. He hacks into their accounts. He gets a thrill out of making complete strangers watch his acts of terror. His tech-savvy ways also allows him to control other people's webcams, and we don't know how many he has breached. He is on several most wanted lists of different agencies. We have never found out what he looks like. The faces he uses on those terrible live streams are prosthetic. He has maintained stringent anonymity and avoided the news cycle. I'm sorry you saw such torment. The good part is you turning in your computer helped us at least find out his last known whereabouts. The scene's searched and we have some evidence. He's still out there somewhere. For now, I went to bed that night with a host of emotions. I felt violated by a complete monster that sabotaged my privacy. Moreover, I felt dumb for getting swindled. I still feel shivers over the fact that he is not apprehended. Word of what happened got to the real Isolation Infinity, who has as of late deleted his entire channel. Many speculated on how victims mistaking him for an insane person perturbed him. Sometimes, as I lay my head down and drift off to sleep, I hear a noise by my window. I jump up and think it is a chainsaw. Thus far, it has been a neighbor's lawnmower every time. I hope it stays that way. I knew a woman who never took off her wedding dress. Pauline was a sweet woman who lived across the street. We weren't close as kids or teenagers because she was around 5 years older than me, but our parents were friends. I think she babysat me when I was younger too. When my mother learned that Pauline was engaged, she sent me to help on the bridal shower. Poor mom, she thought I was like that because I was too often around boys and needed to learn to be more feminine, but she's got that backwards. That's when I first learned that Pauline and her soon-to-be husband had made a blood oath. The first to die comes and takes the other as soon as they can, she explained to me, swirling the ruby ring gently around her fingers. Isn't that too dramatic? What if you end up divorcing and marrying other people? We won't. We are soulmates, she assured me. Her naivete made her incredibly beautiful, but it felt really wrong being 21 and thinking that I was so much more mature than a 26 years old. I didn't pursue the matter, but she kept talking about him in a dreamy tone. Aiden would like this, I wish Aiden was here, and so on. Her dreamy tone almost made me believe that soulmates existed and that you could make the person you love the most follow you in death by just willing it. I met Pauline's friends, and we all ended up having some quality girl time. Pauline explained to us all how she believed that you can wake up in the afterlife and start controlling things with your mind. Of course your memories will be hazy, she clarified. But that's why we made the blood oath, so we can remember. And how will one get the other back? I asked, entertaining her. I like to believe that we'll both grow wings. It was all terribly silly when I think back, but Pauline had something about her that made everyone pay attention and marvel at her words. Despite the age gap, we ended up becoming good friends. I think we were finally at an age where it didn't matter anymore. Since I was in college but lived with my parents and didn't need to work, I had a lot of spare time to accompany her to wedding dress fittings, cake tasting, and all the little things that were the world for brides. But Pauline was a pleasant bride to be and never freaked out. She was just thrilled about marrying the man of her dreams and wanted to make it pretty if possible. Little by little, I grew to understand her devotion to Aiden, and he was just as crazy about her, if not more. When they were together, the world felt like a brighter and warmer place, like marshmallows slowly melting over my heart. The day of the wedding came, around half a year after her bridal shower. It was neither a big nor a small wedding. It felt like both Pauline and Aiden were able to invite exactly everyone they wanted around on their happiest day. Not one more, not one less. I felt somewhat honored to be there. Still, the happiest day never came. When Pauline arrived, belated as any bride should, there was whispering and disquiet. Aiden wasn't there yet. Her smile didn't falter because she was completely sure that he would never bail on her. But I could tell she was worried. The bridesmaids, her two closest friends since high school, started making calls to try to find out if the groom had a sudden illness. Soon they realized that Aiden's parents were there, but not his brother. They informed that their other son was supposed to drive the groom as part of his best man's duties. When the devastating news came, everyone wanted to comfort her. Everyone wanted desperately to protect her precious heart, but it was too torn apart to notice anyone else. It was all too fast and scary. A sports car ran a red light straight into the mirage. The man in the passenger seat was dead on arrival. The driver was taken to the hospital, but his state was critical. It was also hard on everyone. Aiden's brother ended up surviving, but he'll be tetraplegic for life due to severe injury on his spinal cord. As far as I know, he's also miserable because he wished he could be the one who died. Right after the wedding that never happened, Pauline and Aiden's parents dealt with selling the house they had just bought, and Pauline continued living with her parents. They both still worked office jobs, so her other friends and I started taking turns keeping her company while they weren't home. I did my best to be there for my neighbor and friend, but she wasn't there. She was living in delusion, and the only thing you could see leaking into reality was her desolation. I never saw such a deep and heart-wrenching sadness. Pauline refused to take off her dress. She would spend the whole day by the window waiting for Aiden and the whole night crying because she missed him desperately. Every single day. She was hopeful it was a matter of time until he woke up on the other side and remembered to bring her along. That's why she wouldn't take off the dress. He had died on his wedding suit, so it was only natural that she was up to par. Her parents and every single one of her friends tried to coax her into changing her clothes. We promised she could always keep the dress close for when Aiden came, but she knew that we didn't really believe he would. It was like promising your kid that you'd buy them a happy meal some other day. No one dared to penetrate her grief and force her out of the dress. She spent the day in it, slept in it, even bathed in it. Since we live in a warm and arid weather, having it dry wasn't an issue, only everything else. The once beautiful organza and silk were now ragged, grimy, and smelling. But she still refused to take it off. She started to believe that Aiden wouldn't be able to spot her in the crowd if she wasn't wearing it. It was impossible to change her mind, and even though she was seeing a therapist 3 times a week, she wasn't improving. Her mourning and PTSD were turning into a darker, more permanent mental illness. She started talking to Aiden, then explained to us that he was nearby so she could feel him coming. He was just taking a while because flying is really hard when your wings are newly acquired. Then one morning, she disappeared for good. No one saw her leaving, and no one saw her at all after that. The only thing that we were able to find, in the small grove behind the house, was her filthy wedding dress. It had 2 large holes poked on her back, like it had grown wings. After finding the dress, everyone who loved Pauline was relieved. Her mother readily admitted that she actually believed that Aiden somehow had come back to take her. Others weren't so fond of the supernatural explanation, but thinking that there was a chance that it happened brought us a sense of closure. It's not that we were happy about her death, but we conformed to the possibility of her finally finding her peace. She was an angel, after all. Why wouldn't she grow wings and escape her flesh prison? The family held a beautiful memorial service in her honor, and slowly we all started moving on with our lives. Now, you might ask what I believe in. I would laugh bitterly because I don't have this choice to begin with. Being the person who spent the most time watching Paul in those days, it was only natural that I was the one to found her dead in the bathtub. Hiding and subsequently getting rid of her body was the hardest thing I have ever done. Tampering with the dress, though, was eerily healing. Still, I think that she would be pleased to know that I faked her rapture. A romantic and mystifying death fitted her way more than suicide. This is what it's like to live in a dystopia. You wake up and scroll through the notifications on your phone reading, through bleary eyes, that somewhere far away, something horrible has happened. There is a fire in California, a flood in Pakistan. Scientists report that 1 million mollusks died during a recent heatwave off the coast of Australia, and the billionaire has tweeted again. You did not get up in time to make coffee at your apartment, so you buy one on the way to work and feel guilty about it all morning. Everything is more expensive and you are supposed to be cutting back on the little luxuries. You live in fear of the letter from your landlord telling you that rent will go up. Every time you reach into your mailbox it feels like placing your hand in a steel trap that might swing shut. In traffic on the way home you watch the light drain from the sky and dread the days to come when your work commute will be in the dark, when your daylight hours will not be yours. After dinner and dishes, you sit on the couch and feel the few remaining leisure hours seep through your fingers. You want to get up and do something, to not waste the hours before you must go to sleep and the day resets, but you do not. You scroll on your phone while the TV plays quietly in the background and then you go to bed. The weather that weekend is beautiful. You want to enjoy the respite from the cold bite of winter, but the unbroken string of warm days is eerie. You find yourself hoping for a cold snap, to wake up early and grumble while you scrape frost off your windshield with numb fingers, the breath leaving your body in plumes of steam reminding you that you are alive. The rupture and the steady, familiar march of the seasons leaves a sense that the world has been tilted inexorably off its axis, that you will look back years from now at these warm November days as the beginning of something irrevocable. Your phone tells you an old actor whose name is vaguely familiar has died. North Korea is testing missiles over the Sea of Japan. A young man has emerged from within the maelstrom of fervid right-wing internet conspiracies to attack someone with a hammer. Within hours, as if consumed by some great beast, he is erased. The sites and platforms he frequented, the ones that inspired him to his great act of courage, now deny he exists. He has vanished within the perpetual churn of fear and suspicion without a trace. You wake up, you go to work, you make dinner and watch TV and scroll on your phone and then go to bed. You wake up and do it again. All my exes die after we break up. My first girlfriend, Crystal, died at 16, right after I broke up with her. For a long time I thought it was just a coincidence. I felt differently when my next girlfriend, Nicole, died right after we broke up a few years later. They both died in odd circumstances. Crystal crashed her car flat sober on a straight road by herself. Nicole drowned in the bathtub after falling asleep. Both were labeled as accidents. I was never questioned by police, but plenty of people around town talked, wondered if I was cursed. I wondered the same. Then I moved away. The military took me all the way across the country and I was happy. I fell in love with a girl named Katie. Everything was good until I went to a cousin's wedding out of town by myself. The drinks flowed. Too many. I lost control. I got in deep with a girl there I thought was too hot to not keep talking to and keep drinking with. We ended up back in my hotel room. I was too drunk to stop. We had sex and she stayed the night with me. I woke up with an instant sinking feeling of regret. I also woke up alone, but the girl whose name I couldn't even remember was in the bathroom. She was crying. I listened to her weep uncontrollably for a few moments, unsure of what to do. Then I heard glass breaking and I rushed into the bathroom. The girl from the night before was in there with a shard of broken mirror in her grasp. I begged her not to hurt herself. She screamed back at me that she loved her boyfriend and she couldn't believe what she had done and she wanted to die. Then she inexplicably started saying a name I hadn't heard in years. Holiev. Hearing that name reached into the darkest recesses of my brain. Holiev was a dirt poor girl in my 5th grade class. Homely, she was teased and someone who received no interest as someone anyone wanted to date. Instead she was mocked. We went too far. Someone dared me to ask out Holiev and pretend to be her boyfriend for a week. I agreed to do it, trying to impress my peers. Holiev seemed to have no idea the thing was a farce. She held my hand on the schoolyard and didn't seem to see the other kids snickering all the while. The worst part is I could feel she was sweet and genuine during our time together. She was a nice person. I had to get out of it. I had my friend break up with her a few days into the spoof relationship. Holiev was crushed. I felt horrible. She never made eye contact with me again. One day after recess, I came back to my desk and found a piece of paper with burnt ends and found an endless abyss of vulgar and dark words scrawled all over it in black ink and pentagrams. I tried to decipher what it specifically all meant but couldn't. It just said awful things. Embarrassed and guilty, I never told anyone about it or confronted Holiev about it. Holly have moved away at the end of that school year. One of the girls in the class said she lived near her and thought her parents were deep into the occult, witches, spells, all that kind of stuff. I figured it was bullshit. It wasn't until I heard the woman in the bathroom screaming out her name that all those scrawled words of hate and love and darkness on that burnt paper Holly have left on my desk came back into my head. That dark little girl must have cursed me and any lover that left me. HOLLYEV. The word spat out of my one-night stand in the bathroom and snatched me out of my memory dive. Then the woman took that shard of glass and ferociously sliced both of her wrists before I could even try to do anything. The girl from the wedding ended up living, and she explained to everyone that she did what she did to herself and wanted to cover up for me being there to protect her own relationship. So I got lucky and no one ever found out. I know what you're thinking now though, but don't. The girl later died after her wounds were infected from the gashes. The curse was still alive. I had an easy solution to it all. I was going to marry Katie and stay with her forever. I proposed. She was a bit thrown off by the haste, but she said yes. Everything was going well. We kept going through the motions of love and prep and slow planning our wedding. I wasn't in any particular hurry. Then I came home one day and her wedding ring was resting on the kitchen counter with a note that she was leaving me. No particular reason given. She said in the note she had to stay away from me for a week so she could be clear of mind. There was no way I could make that happen. I knew I was racing a clock. I was waiting to hear that she had died every second as I drove around going to every place that she could be. I found her at her sister's house, and after hours of pleading and explaining that her safety was in serious question, she finally came out and talked to me in the yard. I explained everything. I watched her face convey that she now regretted every single second of our relationship. Then she walked inside. Weeks went by without much sleep. I kept just thinking I was soon going to be invited to her funeral, and I wondered if it would be in some circumstance where people thought I might have done it to her. She showed up in the middle of the night one night with a knock on my door. I let her in, so happy to see her alive and breathing. She explained she had nearly died in 3 separate freak accidents since she left me. She believed in the curse. She could feel it inside her. She had suicidal thoughts she had never even imagined before. We had to be together. The wedding was back on. Now you're probably wondering, why did that dark little girl who I fucked with back in 5th grade do something that ultimately won me back the love of my life? Wasn't she now going to kill Katie or something? The thing was, my time away from Katie made me realize that I didn't love her. I didn't really miss her and enjoyed my time alone. I thought about my previous, dearly departed partners, and thought I loved them more than her, and I dreamed of a relationship that would truly bring it all together for me. I was cursed with a fake love forever, or I had to be okay with Katie dying. So the fake relationship I pranked that poor girl with in 5th grade meant I was going to be stuck in a fake relationship for the rest of my life. Well played, Holiev. I have memories of people who don't exist. It started with Kyle. We were going to meet up later that morning for a gaming session, but I had something at work come up and couldn't make it. I called Kyle's cell phone to tell him of the news, but it went straight to an answering machine with an automated voice telling me, "The number you have called has not been recognized." That's odd, I thought to myself, as he changed numbers. Surely he would have messaged to tell me that by now. I was late for work, as usual, and so resolved to drop by Kyle's apartment on the way home. In hindsight, I should have went straight to him. Kyle is the type of person to be a hand's reach away from a phone at all times. I should have realized that something was off, but I didn't. I instead went to work. I had to get that sweet paycheck after all. After my shift, I drove the short 10-minute journey to his apartment. He lived on the 5th floor, almost at the top of the building. And of course, today the elevator wasn't working. I sighed and began trudging up the steps until I got to his floor. I quickly looked for the metal-plated numbers. 501, signifying his apartment, was behind that door. I walked over to it and knocked at the door. "Who is it?" A female voice answered. "Who is that?" Well, Kyle had mentioned having a girlfriend before. This must be her. "It's Kyle's friend, Daniel." I replied. "I don't know any Kyle." "Are you sure you have the right address?" "She doesn't know Kyle and she's in his apartment." That doesn't make any sense. The door suddenly opened and a woman who appeared to be in her mid-20s stepped out. The numbering system this place has going on is confusing at best. "Kyle probably lives one floor up or down," she said with a smile. "I'm pretty sure this is the place. I have been here many times after all. ... You mean to my apartment?" I looked past her shoulder and into her apartment, and it looked like Kyle had never stepped foot in the place. There were way more decorations and colors, and overall the place was just tidier. "You know what? Never mind. You're probably right." I smiled and walked away. What is going on? First the phone number and now this. Where's Kyle? As I walked down the stairs I called Kyle's sister, who picked up almost straight away. I had met her at a small party and we had hit it off almost instantly. The relationship only lasted a couple of months, but we had parted on friendly terms and still kept in touch every so often. "Daniel, how are you?" "Hey, Meg, sorry to bother you. I just wanted to see if you know where Kyle is, as I haven't been able to reach him, and he seems to have moved out of his apartment." "Who? Kyle ... your brother." "I don't have any siblings." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about your brother. Is this meant to be a joke? If so, it's not funny." "What the hell? She doesn't remember her own brother. What is going on today?" "I'm not joking." I yell at her. "Listen, Daniel, I've got to go. We can continue this stupid conversation later." I put the phone down with a sigh. This was getting too weird for me. This has to be a prank Kyle set up. Yeah, that's what it is. Just a big, elaborate prank. He's probably waiting for me back at home, laughing his head off. Let's go there now. I quickly hopped in my car and practically sped to my house, telling myself all the way there about how creative this prank was, making me think I've lost my mind. I grabbed my keys and opened the front door ... and there's no one else there but my roommate, Eric. He's a slightly overweight engineering major who would rather die than help clean. but he's a great guy to be with and I enjoy his company. Eric, has Kyle come by here at all today? Who? Look, if this is some sort of prank all of my friends know about except me, can you just stop it right now? Man, I have no idea what you are talking about. Okay, fine, don't tell me then. I storm out of the living room and make my way to my bedroom. I flop down on my bed. Let's just get some sleep. Everything will be better in the morning. How wrong I was. As usual, when I woke up the next day, I went to the kitchen to make myself breakfast. Eric wasn't there, which was strange as he usually wakes up before me. I looked outside and his car wasn't there. Confused, I called his phone. The number you have called has not been recognized, came the automated reply. What the heck? I ran back to his room. Everything he owned, gone. I went through the entire house. There wasn't a trace of Haim left. Even the hole in the wall he made when moving a chair was gone. The smooth section of wall in its place. It was like he never even existed. I couldn't take it anymore. I slumped against a wall and started crying. The last time I had cried was at my grandmother's funeral, and even then I had kept my composure. Now, the tears fell freely. I must have sat sobbing there for at least an hour before my phone vibrated. It was Meg. She had texted, "Do you want to chat about yesterday?" I did want to chat. Yes. What were you going on about, then? Do you remember Eric? What? My roommate? I thought you lived alone. Well, I suppose I do now, seeing as how he's gone. Are you okay? Is everything all right? Was I? My life was crumbling before my eyes. People who had existed one day simply vanished the next, and nobody else seemed to realize. I'm fine, I said, even though I was not. All right then, see you soon. Bye. The truth was, I was scared. Scared that people were vanishing without a trace. Scared that more people might too. I was scared that I was going insane. But most of all, I was scared that I was next. My wife has a removable face. I've never glimpsed what lies beneath it, but my best friend has. Samantha told me about it on our third date. We were watching a movie on her couch when I made my move to kiss her. She whipped her hand in front of my face and blocked me. "There's something you need to know," she said. I braced myself. Here it comes. I'm not ready for a relationship. Nothing to do with you, of course. It was the absolute last thing that I wanted to hear, because I was already crazy about her. Okay, I said. I have a removable face. That's a new one. You have a what now? I was about to laugh, but she was wearing a deadly serious expression. I have a removable face. Is that, like, a metaphor or something? No, my face is literally removable. Look closely. She lifted her chin and traced her jawline with a finger. You can see the seam. After admiring how beautiful her neck was for a dizzying moment, I leaned in for an inspection. It was very hard to see, but it did look like there was a slightly unnatural transition there from her face to her throat. I grew dizzier as a dozen questions rushed into my brain. Don't bother asking why or how or anything like that, said Samantha. I can't tell you that. If that's going to be a problem, you should leave now. I'm letting you know this because I like you and I want to take the next step, but this is non-negotiable. Okay, I said, unsure of what was happening. Not a problem. So what? You have a removable face. Who cares? It looks good. There's something else. Once a day, usually in the evening, I have to remove the face and disinfect the inside of it. If I don't, it will rot. This takes about an hour, give or take, depending on how my day went. During this time, you must never ever look at my real face. Never. Do you understand? Why? Yes. Got it. Don't ask about it. Don't look at your real face. Samantha stood up. Now, I'm going to go into the bathroom and clean my face. That will give you plenty of time to think about what I've told you. If you're here when I'm done, that's great. I would like that. But if you're gone, I'll understand. She turned and walked into her bedroom. I sat in stunned silence as I heard the bathroom door close. I gave the thing some serious thought. It was possible that it was a joke of some kind. It was possible that it was a delusion. Was it possible that it was true? Well, it was certainly possible to transform an actor's face with movie makeup, so I supposed it was possible that Samantha wore a removable face every day. Maybe she had had a horrible accident where her flesh had been mangled. Maybe her face had been melted by acid, or burned by fire, or the skin shorn off by heavy machinery. If it had, I would never know, because she would never tell me, and I would never see it. I pictured a face of raw, naked muscle, rotting away. Could I kiss her if that was what I was kissing? But wasn't that what we all were, under the skin? Just muscle and bone and blood and squishy organs. I paced around the living room, running my hand through my hair. I liked Samantha a lot. She was smart and funny and beautiful. But was that beauty real? Did it count? Did it matter if it was real or not? Was I being superficial even worrying about it? When she came out of the bathroom, I was still there. I looked at her face. She smiled and I was in love. We dated, we moved in together, we decided to get married. For the most part, it was a completely normal relationship, typical of two young people in love, building a life together. During the day, it was easy to forget about the face altogether. It looked natural enough, and only in certain positions, in certain lights, was there ever any indication that it wasn't natural. But every night was the same. Samantha would close herself in the bathroom, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 2, and clean the inside of her face. The curiosity never left me. I would sit there and wonder what was under that face. I came so close to barging in on her a few times, but I never did. I did occasionally ask her about it. About what, if anything, had happened. About how it was possible to make the removable face look so real. About what it really looked like underneath. I tried to coax her into showing me, assuring her that I loved her no matter what, and didn't give a damn what her real face looked like. I was just curious, that's all. She never showed me, or told me the story behind it. She didn't get upset at me, she'd just shrug and say, you know, you can't see it. You know I can't tell you about it. I never told anybody about Samantha's removable face. It's not that she asked me not to. I just didn't think it was anybody's business. Except once, I did tell somebody. It was during my bachelor's party. We had rented several cabins in Big Sur and spent the night drinking and packing our noses with powders that we shouldn't have been packing our noses with. Everyone else had passed out and the sun was creeping up behind us as I stood on the majestic cliffs with my friend Chris, looking down on the Pacific waves crashing against the rocks. Chris was my best friend, as close to a brother as I'd known. We'd grown up together and visited each other at college often and spent the summers together. After college, we'd moved to different cities, but we stayed in close contact. Standing there on the cliffs, I told Chris about Samantha's removable face. At first, he thought I was joking. Then he had 1,000 questions, most of which I couldn't answer. What's underneath? I don't know, man. I don't know. Doesn't that drive you crazy, not knowing? I shrugged. Lots of stuff I don't know. Don't know how to do calculus, and I don't know what happens when we die. But dude, she's about to be your wife, and you don't even know what she looks like. I mean, I'd have to take a look. Like, you could set a camera up in the bathroom. That's where she does it, right? Set up a camera and have a look and then you'll know. I sighed. Yeah, it drives me crazy. I've asked her 1,000,000 times, but she told me I could never look. Gotta respect that, man, even if I don't like it. That's love. Chris laughed. You telling me to respect a woman? Up is down now. Then we fell back into talking about old times as a new day dawned. Chris was in town for business last week and planned on spending the weekend at our house. The conversation at Big Sur had happened 4 years ago, and we hadn't spoken about Samantha's removable face since. Despite keeping in close contact and seeing each other as often as two people transforming into adults in different parts of the country can. It happened on Saturday evening. We were lounging lazily in the backyard, deep into the beer, having just finished with some grilled steaks, when I got a text from work. Gotta admit, I groaned. I have to make a work call. Seriously, said Samantha, raising an artificial eyebrow. On a Saturday night. My biggest client, baby. Sorry, it is what it is, I guess, said my wife. I'm going to head inside and get cleaned up. Chris, are you okay just hanging out for a bit? Chris smiled. I'll be fine. Got my beer, got some weeds to pull in your garden. God knows your lazy-ass husband isn't going to do it. Those tomatoes are choking to death. It's a tragedy. I rolled my eyes and went into the side yard to make my call. 15 minutes into it, I heard the screams coming from inside. Both my best friend and my wife were wailing in terror. I dropped the phone and ran into the house and down the hall to our bedroom. Through the open door, I could see that the door to the master bathroom was also standing open. Don't come in, screamed Samantha. I don't have my face on. Call an ambulance. He looked. Oh God, he looked. She sounded desperate and truly horrified. That made me desperate and horrified, and I wanted to rush into the bathroom, but I knew suddenly that that would be a mistake. I knew suddenly that Samantha didn't want me to look at her real face, not out of a sense of vanity, but for my own safety. Chris staggered backwards, out of the bathroom. He was holding a straightened-out paperclip, which he had used to pick the privacy lock. Now he was stabbing it again and again into his eyes, shouting gibberish. He was clearly in the depths of madness, and it turned my stomach to see him mutilate himself. Call a fucking ambulance. My wife screamed, don't come in here. He fucking looked. I turned and ran back to the side yard, where my phone was lying in the newly mowed grass. My client was still on the line, alarmed, asking what was happening, what all the screaming was. I hung up on him and called 911. When the paramedics arrived, Chris was having a seizure in the hallway. Samantha was stroking his head, sobbing. Her face was on, but it had been done hastily, and everything looked a little off. My world has been dark this past week. My best friend is in a psychiatric hospital under suicide watch. He's completely blind and mostly catatonic, except when he slips into a violent, babbling mania. The doctors are optimistic that his state is temporary, but they don't know the truth about what caused it, because I told the paramedics that Chris had taken a large dose of psychedelic mushrooms and fallen into psychosis. I saw no good reason to tell the truth about what had happened. Who would believe that one look at my wife's real face would make somebody insane? At best, we would be the subjects of a long investigation. At worst, we would have to prove that what we were saying was true by showing somebody Samantha's face. Then the same thing would happen again, and what after that? I had no idea and no interest in finding out. For Samantha's part, I knew that she would never consent to show anybody her real face, no matter what the consequences of refusal were. I did get a follow-up call from the police, asking me to confirm my story. The hospital found no traces of psilocybin in Chris' blood, though that's not unheard of, since it has a short half-life. If they end up testing his hair, I will likely be in a lot of trouble. But that's truly the least of my concerns. Samantha is in a state of her own. She still cleans the inside of her face, though not as regularly, and when she puts it back on, it's always crooked now. It is beginning to smell a little bit. I've tried to assure her that it wasn't her fault. He knew, I said. I told him that nobody was ever allowed to look at it. He knew, and then he broke into the bathroom. This is not on you, baby. Please, talk to me. Not on me. That one look at my fucking face makes people insane. Please, I just need some time alone. As for me, I am doing my best to hold it together. Do you know what's strange, though? Despite what happened to Chris, I still find myself curious about what my wife's real face looks like. More curious than ever, really. I convinced my daughter fairies were real, now she won't speak to me. To get Grace pumped about the big move, I told her our new home was inhabited by fairies. See, we were relocating to an island in the north of Scotland, and she wasn't exactly thrilled. But Dublin only served as a painful reminder of her mother. I sorely needed the change of scenery. The promise of fairies made her face light up. Historically, those creatures played a huge part in the islanders' belief system, so I assumed the tourist board leaned into this for publicity, like the Loch Ness Monster. The Fae Folk Community Advisor sounded like a made-up title. After we settled in, Grace spent her days fairy spotting, which entailed wandering the coast and exploring various enchanted caves. Seeing her thrive meant I didn't even mind the locals, who all seemed a little off. It felt like, wherever we went, they'd constantly smile at us. It seemed odd, given the permanent cold shoulder we'd received since arriving. Then, as my daughter and I sat down to dinner one evening, there came a knock at the door. It was Grace. Another Grace, identical to the first in all ways except hair, which stuck out in every direction, almost feral. While I stood there, mystified, Grace asked this girl who she was, why they looked and sounded exactly alike. She claimed her name was Grace, said she moved here from Ireland, and that her mommy died in a car crash. Quickly I summoned the community leader who pointed out markings carved into the back of feral Grace's knee, hot and inflamed. It resembled a zigzag inside two triangles. The leader pulled me aside and explained my daughter would die if we didn't destroy her changeling doppelganger. Then she summoned the islanders into the woods for a cleansing ritual which, as parent to the MIT, required me to douse the oil and toss the lantern. After the ceremony, Grace finally settled in at school and made some friends. I tried desperately to forget what happened. However, just as Dublin reminded me of my wife, the island now made me picture my daughter, begging her daddy to untie her while the flames surged and swelled. And so, I accepted a job in London. On our final day, the leader popped over to say goodbye. With that sly smile the locals all seemed to share, she handed me a gift and said not to open it until we reached England. I made it as far as the ferry. It was a book about Fae folk and their spells. Halfway through, a page had been marked with a post-it note. I flicked open to a chapter depicting zigzags inside two triangles like the one on the changeling's leg, and then read the accompanying text. In order to assume human form, a changeling will carve runes into its victim flesh, thereby allowing it to imitate their physical appearance. And as I glanced up from the book, my daughter smiled at me. That awful, familiar islander smile. They say my husband is cheating on me, but I know he isn't. I love my husband. I know he isn't cheating on me. Now, other women might be suspicious if their husband started coming home in different clothes than he left in. But not me. I trust him. I know he's not cheating on me. Other women might be suspicious if their husband started spending longer hours at the office. Other women would jump to conclusions seeing their husband with so many younger girls. Friends from work, he calls them. Other women might be upset constantly seeing the girls that take up so much of their husband's time. Reminders of the fact he's never home. But not me. When I watch the news and I see the pictures their families chose for the missing posters, I can't help but smile. My husband isn't cheating on me. When I was a kid, my dad kept a second family in our basement. Growing up, I thought everyone had a second family in their basement. In retrospect, I understand how ridiculous that sounds, but it was all I'd ever known. I knew that every night, my dad tented the leftovers from dinner with foil, got up without a word, and carried the plate to the basement. I'd listen from my room as he lumbered down the creaking steps, held my breath to hear the muffled mumblings of his greeting. I knew that every morning, he'd make the trip downstairs to see his second family off before work, then kiss me on the top of my head and ruffle my hair as he walked out. I knew that each Christmas, he'd bring a sack of brightly wrapped packages downstairs in a Santa suit. I knew that my dad had a second family in the basement, and it seemed so normal that I thought everyone else did too. I'll never forget the first time I asked my mom about them. I was young, maybe 5, when I finally found the words to ask, "Mommy, why can't I play with the people in the basement?" My mom was the human embodiment of frenetic energy, an organic perpetual motion machine. Always pacing, or cleaning, or stirring a pot. Always with a lit cigarette tucked between her yellowing fingers. I'll never forget that. As that question hung in the air, she finally stopped for the first time. Her stillness was unsettling in a way I can't quite explain. "We don't talk about them," she rushed, chasing the hurried statement with a lengthy drag off her cigarette. She blew a plume of smoke out the open window before leaning down to meet me at face level, her bloodshot eyes mere inches from my own. "You don't need to play with the kids, but the kids need daddy." She paused again, the haunting image of her at a standstill etching itself into my mind permanently. Finally, she muttered, "Daddy needs them too." That night, I heard my mom shrieking at my dad in their bedroom. I was surprised that they didn't know that I knew, more shocked, frightened, even, to find that they didn't want me to know. Most of all, they didn't want me to tell anyone at school, anyone at all, really. After that night, everything was different. My dad only tended the leftovers after dinner, only brought the food downstairs after I'd gone to bed. He stopped visiting them in the mornings altogether. My mom started acting differently, too. I'd always noticed that she was distant from my dad, had always noticed how she bristled under his touch, how she stole away to the other side of the room whenever he entered. But it got worse after that. As a kid, I felt deeply guilty. I felt like I'd ruined my parents' marriage. But I was just a kid, and I was curious. My mom meant to dissuade me from asking more questions, but she accidentally gave away something that made me even more curious. The downstairs family had kids, maybe kids my own age to play with. I needed to know about them, in the way that little kids need to understand all of the strangeness of this chaotic world, need to make sense of the nonsense that surrounds us daily. The nonsense that we become acclimated to as adults but struggle with endlessly as children, like a puzzle or a riddle or a word problem on a math test about buying 80 watermelons. Another change following that critical night, the basement door was fitted with sturdy lock. Even still, I needed to know. There's something horribly dreadful about finding out that a second basement family is abnormal, something more horrible still about not knowing who or why. By the time I was 7, I made up my mind to get to the bottom of it. To avoid getting in trouble, I could only investigate when 3 conditions were met. I was home from school, my dad was still at work, and my mom wasn't around to catch me. These circumstances rarely overlapped, but the first time I came home from school to find that my dad's car wasn't in the garage and my mom's endless movement had driven her to the point of exhaustion, I threw off my shoes and crept to the basement door, quiet in my sock feet. And then I knocked. It was a quiet knock, for fear of waking my mom from her nap, but it was a knock nonetheless. It was more than just a knock, too. It was an initiation, an invitation, a confrontation of my life's greatest and most terrifying mystery. I jumped when a gentle knock returned from the other side. It was almost immediate, like the person on the other side had been waiting for me. The thought froze me in place for a moment, but I knew I didn't have time to waste. My mouth felt suddenly of sandpaper and chalk, but I leaned into the door to whisper, "Hi." Hi. It was a little girl, her voice sweet yet timid, like testing the keys on a piano for the first time. "I am Ricky. What's your name?" A long pause. "Leela. My brother's is Isaac, but he doesn't talk so good. But he's still little. Mommy says he'll start talking when he's ready. There's 3 of you down there." "MHMM," she replied simply, as if the entire situation felt as wholly normal for her as it had for me, on the opposite side of the basement door. "Daddy comes to visit sometimes, though, so I guess there's 4. My eyes widened as a flurry of questions began to sprout in my mind, but I heard my mom start to stir in her room. I sped down the hallway and into the playroom. I busied my hands with my toys, but my mind was somewhere else. The sprouts of questions continued to grow rapidly, soon overtaking my thoughts like an unruly patch of weeds. And like weeds, the questions were stubborn, hard to, impossible to get rid of. The roots of the situation and its implication unraveled, stretched through my whole body. Fear planted itself firmly in my belly as I was forced to confront the possibility that I didn't really know my dad, didn't really know my own family at all. If my dad was Leela's dad, too, what did that mean for me? For my family? And why wasn't she allowed to come out of the basement? Over the next couple years, I stole away to the basement door in those rare moments of freedom. I got to know Leela, got to like her and eventually even to love her. She was my best friend. As a kid, I was pretty lonely. My classmates shied away from me for reasons I couldn't quite understand, like something about me was inherently repellent to my peers. I only had one friend at school, and at home, I had Leela. As we spoke more, a never-ending stream of back and forth questioning crammed into the briefest moments of time. We both came to understand the differences between us, between our lives and our circumstances. The differences that at first felt so normal grew bigger and sharper and scarier than either of us could comprehend. The unfairness of it all became impossible to ignore. Leela lamented that she wasn't allowed to go to school, that she couldn't go outside to play or make friends or ride bikes around the cul-de-sac in the summer until the street lamps flickered on and the cicadas started to scream. She even longed for the things I loathed most: homework, rinsing off my dishes after dinner, tidying up my room each Sunday morning. She said she'd lived in that basement all of her life, was probably even born down there. She couldn't remember anything different before being locked up in the cold and musty room. I'm ashamed to admit this, but eventually, I couldn't manage the guilt I felt for living the life Leela never had, could never have in my mind. I was so young, so naive. I didn't know how to manage the situation anymore, so I did the only thing I could think of. I stopped trying. I stopped visiting Leela. No more secret, whispered exchanges, no more quick knocks on the door just to let her know that I was there, that anyone at all was there for her. Days and weeks and months and years trickled by with Leela never quite leaving my thoughts, but with her existence instead. Compartmentalized, confined to the basement of my own mind. At home, it was harder to keep thoughts of her locked away. When my dad brought her dinner hours past my bedtime, I'd lay awake warm in my bed. Sometimes I'd hear her scream. Sometimes I'd hear the tray clatter to the floor, the plate fracturing on impact. Sometimes I'd hear her crying, awful, painful sobs, while I assembled new Lego sets in the playroom. Sometimes she would call out my name. I'll never forgive myself for this, I hate myself for it, and I deserve to, but I ignored her every time. Worst of all, though, was when she started knocking. I was finishing up my science homework for the day when the first knock came. A quiet knock, but a knock nonetheless. An initiation, an invitation, a confrontation. My blood ran cold as I realized where it was coming from, who it was coming from. I hopped on my bike and didn't come home until dinner was on the table. That night, I heard my dad scream back at Leela for the first time. He yelled for her to knock it off with all the knocking. He took care of her little brother and her mom, and that he could only do that if she stayed in the basement, if she stayed quiet. She wasn't persuaded, though, and her knocking only grew more frequent and louder. I was about 10 years old by then, so I had a little more freedom. All the freedom in the world compared to Leela. I avoided my house at all costs, only returning in the evenings, where I'd be greeted immediately by the knocking. By then, it was less knocking and more ramming the total weight of her body into the door. My mother took to vacuuming the house obsessively just to cover up the noise. She wouldn't even look my dad in the eye anymore. I imagined the bruises blooming on Leela's shoulder, up and down the length of her arm. If it hurt her, she didn't let on. She didn't stop. Sleep became a distant memory, leaving me dazed and irritable and confused and, most of all, terrified. I began showing up at my school friends, now my only friends, house unannounced just to escape Leela's knocking. His parents clearly didn't like me, and tensions rose between the two of us kids, escalating to a boiling point that ended in a fight. I slugged him in the gut, and he returned with the words that broke me, broke everything. A blow far more powerful than he could have delivered with small hands balled up into fists. My mom says you're a bastard, that your mom's a whore. I had to look up the words in my dictionary when I got home. I had to gather the courage to, once again, ask a difficult question. Mom, am I a bastard? I had to watch my mom lose her momentum to stop again. I had to watch what little light she had left in her go out. I had to sit there as she left the room, had to sit there spilling hot tears as the knocking kicked up again, each powerful thrust against the door racking my mind, a painful reminder that Leela was coming for me. But my mom came back, and she returned with an old newspaper clipping in her hands, worn at the edges. She held it to her chest as she finally told me the truth about Leela, about Dad's second family in the basement. I was young, but I needed to know. My mom knew it, too. Through choking sobs, she told me about my dad's old family, the one he'd had and made before he met her. The horrible mistake they'd made, the one that gave her the best thing she'd ever had in her life but took away 3 others. About how my dad's old wife was already skating on thin ice, her cries for help that went unanswered. How when she found out about what my mom and my dad were doing that what little was left beneath her shattered. About how they couldn't have known, but about the guilt she carried regardless, like a heavy backpack. Mom. Yes, sweetie, but I can never put it down. That Leela was dead, and Isaac, too. That their mom had done that to them, and then did it to herself too. My dad found them in the basement when he got home from work. That he'd never forgiven himself, and my mom never had either. That when they reappeared back in the basement like nothing had happened, even after their bodies were taken and buried all those years ago, they couldn't think of anything to do but to give them as normal of a life as possible. Yet another difficult question, but why do they have to stay in the basement? I found out later that evening, when my dad came home from work and unlocked the door. Leela came out of the shadows, and I flinched instinctively as I saw her face for the first time, saw the gaping hole in her face where her left eye should have been. Isaac was little like Leela said, but the oozing wound to his jaw would have made it nearly impossible for him to speak if he had the chance to grow up. I was scared at first, but I put on my brave face and took Leela by the hand. I played with Leela and Isaac for the first time, shared my toys with them, laughed with them. I didn't meet their mom that day, but I would, years later. Once she and Leela and Isaac knew what became of them, she struggled to cope. She doesn't come out often, but I treat her with kindness when she does. The woman I know her as now couldn't imagine doing what she did. My dad's second family still stayed inside, but they were no longer confined to the shadows of the basement after that day. They became less of my dad's second family as we all became one larger family that laughed and played and loved together. I don't live in that house anymore. I'm an adult now, with an enormous appreciation for all of the freedom and opportunities available to me that I once took for granted. I know my family is far from normal, even horrible and horrifying in many ways that I helped to perpetuate as a kid, but it's all I've ever known. I love them, all of them. I still visit whenever I can, for birthdays and for Christmas and for summer vacations. And whenever I do visit, I take a moment to be grateful for the fact that when I knock on the front door, Leela opens it. I've just seen my family's abandoned old farm being explored by someone on TikTok. He shouldn't have gone there. It's late. I'm doing my usual, sitting in bed long past the time I need to be asleep, scrolling mindlessly through TikTok. It's a bad habit, I know, but you're here reading Reddit, right? I lazily flick the last watched video away. A cat wearing a helmet fashioned out of a melon, and a live feed takes its place. It's dark, with torches or headlamps making almost a strobing effect in some crusty old building. Ghost hunters or something like that. Not my thing. I raise my finger to scroll again, but at the last second something catches my eye that stops me dead. The camera pans past a black and white framed photograph on the wall. It's my grandparents on their wedding day. I sit stock still, watching intently as the camera moves forward. I would recognize that photo anywhere, having examined it countless times as a child visiting their farmhouse. It was my favorite picture out of any hanging on their walls. This TikToker couldn't be in my grandparents' old farm, surely. It was true it had been left to fall into a state of disrepair after their passing. I look at their handle, Aben0netexp0 or 305. I make a mental note to click on their page and see where else they have been, but for now cannot bring myself to look away from this feed in case it disappears forever. They move further into the living room. A leather armchair, well worn in its day, but now the cushions were sunken in and the fabric torn beyond repair. The fireplace, exposed stone and an enormous oak mantel, once the impressive focal point of the room, now warped and cracked. The lucky horseshoes that had hung from it litter the hearth, dull and lifeless. They had always been pride of place over the fire, polished and would glint in the firelight of an evening. The person holding the camera is speaking. I'd hardly noticed as I was so wrapped up in a cloud of nostalgia and outrage at this space being invaded. There's so many horseshoes around here, he was saying. They're over door thresholds. There was one laid into the kitchen floor, and these ones look like they used to hang over the fireplace. Now I know this is a farm and they probably did have horses, but they are just everywhere. Now everyone knows horseshoes are known as a good luck charm, but unless you're into your folklore you might not know that they also ward off evil spirits. I roll my eyes, common knowledge. Another TikToker claiming to be an expert on the paranormal. His observation does set off a small prickle on the back of my neck though. There were a lot of horseshoes at the farm. I tucked that bit of knowledge away for future reference. Many years ago they had horses, but since the advent of modern tractors and farming methods they were not needed, and neither Granny nor Grandpa had any great love for horses that I was aware of. Granny had always been a tad superstitious though. Horseshoes, lucky heather, four-leaf clovers, that sort of thing. For the most part, I loved going to stay at Granny and Grandpa's when I was small. Apart from going to the bathroom alone. The only bathroom was upstairs, at the furthest end of the house from the kitchen or living room. To a kid it felt like an epic journey. Going up wasn't so bad. Once the door from the living room shut, you would find yourself in the cool, quiet passageway, all sounds of life muffled by the thick wood. The air was so still you could hear a pin drop. You'd walk along, then turn back 180 degrees to go up the stairs. The upstairs landing was split on 2 levels, so you'd step down onto the back landing, then take a right to get to the bathroom. It was going back down that was the problem. Since I was old enough to go to the bathroom unaccompanied, once I turned that corner and got to the top of the stairs, a feeling would hit, like an icy finger in the small of your back. Run. I would run down the stairs and back to the kitchen as quickly as my little legs could carry me. More than that, it was imperative that at no point did I turn and look back up at that landing. Bad things would happen if I looked back. As a child, I couldn't really express these feelings, but now as I remember it, it felt like a creeping black mass seeping out of the walls of that back landing, coalescing, and all it would take to give it a corporeal form would be a terrified look back from a fleeing child. Then I would heave open the wooden door and it felt like all the color suddenly seeped back into the world, the warmth and noise of a busy family home flooding my senses. Like pressing play and the film restarts where it left off. In the live camera feed, they approach that solid oak door. It's hanging on one hinge, slightly ajar and swaying almost imperceptibly. I notice before the cameraman says aloud that there is a large cast iron horseshoe, big enough for a Shire horse or a Clydesdale, nailed above the threshold that I don't remember, but it suddenly feels important. Like a talisman thrown up in a last-ditch effort to stop something. I grip my phone harder with a clammy hand, positive that they should not go deeper into the bowels of this house. I look at the comments flashing up. It's so creepy. Seriously bad vibes. Did anyone else just see a shadow? With a shaky hand I start typing a comment, telling them not to go in there, to just leave. As if they will listen to me, just another voice in the throng. In my peripheral vision as I'm typing I can see the guy push open the door, which gives way with a creak, and just as I'm about to press send I hear his sharp intake of breath. What the? I hear him whisper. I drop my phone onto the bed in shock. Standing side by side in the passageway are 2 gaunt figures dressed in nightgowns. They wear preternaturally wide grins which stretch their papery gray skin taut. Where their eyes belong are only dark pits, what could be boreholes straight into the inky depths of hell itself. Somehow worse than that, Granny and Grandpa were holding hands. It was unmistakably them despite their demonic manifestation. Though it's only a second, it feels like I stare into those twisted faces for half an eternity. All hell breaks loose on camera. A Benzero net Expl0 or 305 turns on his heel and runs back the way he came. The camera work falls into disarray as he bolts for the exit, but I swear in that fraction of the second as his phone whips around, the creepily wide grins on their faces twist into a grisly snarl. I am transfixed by my phone screen, listening to the TikTok guy's heavy breathing and watching the torch flit around on screen, lighting up walls and floors at random as he makes a break for it. He's close to the back door as long as he doesn't turn the wrong way. 5 or 6 more paces and he'll be out. Then shockingly loud on the little phone speakers is an ungodly screech which makes me jump about a foot off my bed. Life has ended. The feed has just gone. I tap the screen futilely. Nothing. Did he make it out? I search for his handle on the app and nothing comes up. I sit for a long time just staring into space, heart thumping. I should have commented sooner. As soon as I realized they were in that house, maybe that would have stopped them going any further. A notification pops up on my phone. A direct message on TikTok. Strangely, there's no account name with the message. Come to us. Very direct, no ambiguity there. I sigh and reach for a notebook from my bedside table to cross the latest attempt off the list. Communication with the dead via the internet is a new development. An extra deep grave didn't do the trick. Rocks in their mouths, black salt, holy water from Lourdes, a stake through the heart. Nothing keeps these 2 restless souls in their grave for long. We don't know if it's the land itself, a curse upon the family, or something else. Did they see that black thing I was so afraid of as a kid? Was that the reason, or a symptom? I glanced down the list of things yet to try. Next up, decapitation of the corpses. I don't relish the thought of that one. I fire off a quick text to my brother. Trouble at mill. That's the code. Code forget your shovel. We're off to dig up our old granny and grandpa again to see if we can finally get them to rest in peace like you're supposed to. The problem is, each time we try to end this and fail, every time they come back they are more changed than before. The last time they climbed out of that grave they looked like themselves, only dead. Upsetting but to be expected. The nightmarish figures I have seen tonight were a world away from that. I worry we are giving them power, feeding them somehow. But we can't just let them roam free, especially when other people get caught in the crossfire. I think this is going to require some outside help. My husband keeps chopping his fingers off. The first time it happened it was a surprise. I heard an awful cry come from the kitchen and I sped through, nearly slipping on the hardwood floors as I went. He stood, doubled over in pain, clutching at his palm that was dripping red with fresh uncongealed blood. His severed finger lay next to an abandoned knife amongst a pile of sliced onions which were now stained bright scarlet. I nearly fainted. There was so much blood that I could almost taste the undertones of metal and iron that hung in the air. It's all right. Stay calm. I found my head in the chaos. I grabbed some frozen peas from the freezer and with concealed disgust, slipped the finger into a Ziploc bag with some of the icy green balls. Neil seemed stuck stiff in shock. He didn't say much on the way to A&E. He just stared at the stump where his finger had been with a morose sort of dedication. A few hours later we were home. The doctors managed to reattach the finger and they bandaged it up tightly to heal. I thought that was it. I thought this would be the end of the severed finger saga, a funny story to tell our grandkids and a reason to buy the pre-cut onions in future. Neil had other ideas. A few weeks later I heard another cry, this time from the garden. Neil was doubled over in pain by the half-trimmed hedge and the garden shears had been discarded in a flower pot. I could see even from the patio doors the little white thumb poking out from the pile of crisped autumn leaves at Neil's feet. Not another one. "It was an accident," he cried out. I remember thinking how obvious his statement was. Of course it had been an accident. Who cuts off their finger deliberately? We went to A&E again and the same doctor attempted to reattach the thumb. It wasn't such a simple task this time, and Neil was given the awful news that he would most likely have reduced mobility due to gnarliness with which the nerves had been severed. We went home and watched some TV. I thought it was strange then, but Neil was clumsy. That he had injured himself twice in a month did not entirely surprise me. The third time I started to think something strange was afoot. This time there wasn't even a cry. Neil stumbled through into the bedroom early one morning with a bloody hand held up for me to see. It was covered in bright red blood that seeped into the barely healed scars from his last accidents. I was becoming desensitized now. I felt nothing but suspicion. How had he allowed this to happen again? The sight of severed fingers was as normal to me now as the look of the sun in the sky. I groaned and rolled out of bed. "What did you do this time?" "Where's the finger?" I hissed. "Table saw. I was trying to make those shelves you wanted." He bit his lip. It fell in the pile of sawdust. The table saw. At this time of the morning, I retrieved the pinky finger and washed the sawdust off it and slipped it into a pack of frozen sweet corn. We were all out of peas as a result of his 2 previous accidents. "Are you doing this on purpose, Neil?" I asked him through gritted teeth in the car on the way to the hospital. We looked at each other with narrowed eyes. The sleep was still crusted in the corners of my eyes and I had not even had the time to brush my hair. I should have been in bed, not chaperoning Mr. No Fingers to the hospital for the 3rd time in 2 months. Why would I cut my fingers off on purpose? He snapped back at me. 3 fingers in the space of 2 months. That's more than clumsiness, that's crazy. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my digits turned white. It was reattached with swiftness, though the doctor seemed as suspicious as me as he scanned over Neil's medical records. 3 fingers on his right hand now bore ghastly scars, all at varying stages of healing. The 4th time I knew he was up to something. I heard him in the kitchen late one night. I snuck out of bed and peeked at him through the half-shut door. He was meal prepping, something he often did. There were piles of broccoli and cauliflower and the scent of salmon lingered in the air. He was humming to himself to pass the time as he grated something carefully into a glass Pyrex dish. I could see it was red cabbage maybe, or "Neil," I called, and he jolted upright. The glass fell to the floor and smashed into 1,000 little pieces, and then I saw it, little strips of flesh and blood. He had grated his finger. "I can explain," he started. "No you can't. Take yourself to the hospital." I fled the house in a hurry and went to stay with my mums. I committed myself to have nothing to do with him going forward, so I sent my brother to pick up my stuff. All the good memories of our wedding in Ibiza, our honeymoon in Barbados, and the funny way his mouth would tilt when I'd make a joke, all of it was but a dim undertone to the stench of fresh blood and the image of his bloody nebby digits. He left me text after text. He called me constantly. When I blocked him on every avenue of communication, he transferred pennies into my bank account with pathetic 20-character messages. "IMSORRY, LOVEYOU, ILLSTOP, over and over, until I must have accumulated 20 pounds worth of pennies. I know what you're thinking. Ignore him, go on with your life, you don't need him. But love is strange, it is like a chain at times, and a positive pregnancy test, well, that's a handcuff." He was different for a while after I returned. Though he was missing a finger from the grating incident, he made no further attempts to sever a digit. We had our baby, a beautiful boy we named Mike, and life was perfect for a small while. Then it happened again. A cry in the middle of the night. I sped through, not even entertaining that it might have been another finger incident. But it was, and this time it was a finger from his left hand, not his right, and he claimed that the digit had fallen down the trash compactor. The doctor suggested psychiatric care and I concurred, but Neil insisted it was an accident, that he had the worst luck. Then it happened again, and each time the finger would be gone or lost. On one occasion it had happened while Neil had been at work. His index finger had gotten stuck between a door at the vet's office and apparently a dog had eaten it after. Another time he had misplaced it in the freezer. My final straw was when he lost his wedding ring. It went down the trash chute. "What do you want me to do? Go down after it?" He yelled. "I want you to stop cutting your fingers off." "Is that too much to ask?" I yelled, so loud I figured all the neighbors in our high-rise building heard. Our baby woke up from his nap and began crying, and I wondered if I looked like a volcano as I felt like I had become one. He had barely any fingers left on his left hand now and only a few on his right. There were hot tears running down my cheeks as I all but collapsed to my knees. I wanted it all to stop. "Why are you doing this, Neil? Please just tell me." "Why? I'm working on something," he mumbled, finally ending the charade that it was all some giant spate of horrendous luck. "I'm taking Mike and I'm going." And I did. I found the key to the damn handcuffs and I hightailed it out of there. My family were great, they helped me on my feet. Unlike last time I left, Neil didn't try to send me any messages. He didn't fight for custody of Mike and he paid his child support on time. I never looked back. My ex who kept lopping his fingers off became just a distant memory. I didn't see Neil at all, not for an entire year. Then I saw it, a strange transfer in my bank account from Neil. £3.33 and a message, IDIDIT. There was another payment a few days after with the same amount and another message, this time, COMESE. I felt an uneasy build in the pit of my stomach, but I ignored it and continued on with my life. I would not be sucked into Neil's absurdity. I would not, but absurdity has a radius effect. Stray too close, even just once, and it latches onto you for dear life. There was a knock on my door one day. I thought it was a parcel, but it wasn't. He was wearing a black sheet. He didn't really look like Neil anymore. All of Neil had been carved out. He had no fingers on either hand. He had only short nubs where digits had once been. He didn't have a nose, just a nub where it had once poked out. He had no ears, just small little lumps with holes in the middle. His pallor was pale and sickly and he was thin, almost as if he had never eaten. When he saw me, he grinned, a wide and human grin that must have hurt his cheeks, and he handed it to me, a bouquet. Except it wasn't a bouquet of roses, nor of pansies or tulips. Nothing nice was in that bouquet. When I saw it, I felt my grasp on reality drift from me. All these years, all these sleepless nights wondering why he had done it. Why did he cut his fingers off? Why? Even then, as I looked upon the culmination of his life's efforts, I don't think I got any closer to knowing. A bouquet of rotten fingers was thrust into my arms with nubby hands. They were each of them stuck on skewers and tied with a florist's ribbon. The skin had been degloved from the bone, peeled and scraped into tiny little petals that twisted round in their rotten absurdity to resemble something like roses. At the center of the macabre mess was a wedding ring, with blackened pieces of rotten flesh crusted onto its dulled gold veneer. I slammed the door on his face and thrust the bouquet back at him. I called the police and they took a report, but no one has been able to find Neil since. I didn't think about it then, but the question has plagued me since. Turning those rotten fingers into roses had been delicate work, a careful and precise art, not achievable by a man with no fingers. Who had carved them? Had Neil been alone in his insanity this entire time, or had there been someone aiding him? I don't know if I'll ever know. My son said his first word the other day. It should have been an exciting moment, but Neil had taken even that from me. Mike gripped the side of his crib with his little perfect fingers and said to me, his face the image of his father, twisted and malformed with delight, "Nub, nub, nub."